We don't often talk about the toll that sewing takes on our bodies. Not only do we do a lot of sitting, we also end up with all sorts of aches and pains from bad posture and clenching. Today's guest, Rose Parr, knows all about it. With a background in personal training and ergonomics, she is the author of So Healthy and Happy. She's here today with me talking about the challenges in our sewing rooms and how our bodies can sew pain-free until we're 100. So grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here's my interview with Rose Parr. Welcome, Rose. Thank you for being on the show. You are coming to me from just outside the city of Toronto, the city of Guelph. Is Guelph your hometown?
Yes, it is. I've been here for about 30 years. Well, so I guess, no, it's not my hometown.
Where are you from originally?
Brockville, which is east of where your parents are.
Ah, I've got a strong connection to Brockville. My
Oh,
sister was born there. I've got all sorts of cousins there.
I probably went to high school with them.
So you are a busy person with many certifications in physical activity. How did you actually come to quilting, which is fairly sedentary?
When I say I went to an agricultural college, I went there to study, it's called nutrition risk management now, but basically you would be like in a hospital as a food service supervisor. And I'd always, again, like probably everyone you interview, I often say I've been sewing for 40 whatever years because I'm 58, but I probably been sewing for 50 years. Like it's just my mom sewed. It just was like, it's just what you did, right? So when I was taking this diploma at Kempville College of Agricultural Technology, they had another one there called, it was home economics. And of course, I'd loved home economics in school and everything. I mean, who didn't? But the thing that really got me is that it didn't cost any more to take their courses. And so many of the credits overlap. So I actually was the very first person in, I don't know, like 150 years or something. I graduated with both diplomas because I was like, it's free. Why wouldn't I do another one? It was interesting courses, but the home ec side was like tailoring, pattern making, dressmaking. And I've forgotten all of it, of course. So I always sewed. And then when my kids were young, my mom quilted. So when my kids were born and all that kind of stuff, it would never occur to me to make a quilt because she made them all. And then I was busy sewing them, curtains and clothes and what have you. And then I did make like one quilt for somebody like 30 years ago. And it was like a rail fence or something. And that's all cute. But it was just like, here you go. I had a baby, it's a quilt. And then I didn't have the same bug that, we have now. And I had young children. My kids are all grown now. They're all in their 20s. But a number of years ago, my mom passed away. So I started quilting again then now. Well, fat quarters and layer cakes. And it just all blew my mind, frankly. So anyway, so I was doing it hobby-wise. And then I kind of decided that I'd been personal training since 96, I guess. I kind of thought, like, I don't want to be a 70-year-old personal trainer, like whatever. And I'd been taking my quilts to a Longarmer. So of course I thought, oh, I'll get a long arm. And so for a number of years, I had my long arm where it is. And my personal training clients would walk past it because they were paying for my long arm at that point. And then now I do other people's quilts. I must say I'm not doing many anymore because I've got all these other things happening.
When did the idea for your book, So Healthy, come along?
When I was personal training over the years, I dealt with a lot of people that had, poor posture from their jobs and things like that. I specialized in older adults as well. So I kind of had lots of experience in lots of areas that way. I also worked part-time for a consulting firm that it was an employee wellness firm that went to different businesses. I didn't develop their ergonomic program, but I helped them, make it work. And so then after that, I went and I took a certification in ergonomics because that all went together with that. And then she had been a personal training client. Then she was a quilting client, had said, you should talk to the guild about this because I guess I was always just saying things to her. She was looking at my setup and I'd kind of be like, well, doesn't everyone do that? And she'd be like, no. So I put together a little PowerPoint and I did area like guilds and that sort of thing. And then I spoke at Festival of Quilts. And that was we were finally able to travel after 30 years. And so we were, of course, going to Scotland. Clients of mine had been there and I was on their website and thinking, well, how, could we end there and start there or whatever? And they had a thing that said tutors. And it was a Sunday morning, like in January, and I applied. An hour later, I get a response from Wendy, the organizer, and the deadline had been a month before. She was just making up her final program. She had a couple little holes in there. Next thing I knew, I was scheduled to speak at Festival of Quilts. And it just was fun. It was so phenomenal. After that, came back home. I was kind of playing around with my PowerPoint in Canva. I have a serious Canva addiction. I really do. And so I was playing around, kind of moving everything over. I always say, yeah, I wrote a book in Canva. Who writes a book in Canva? And then I submitted it to CNC Publishing and they accepted it. Here we are.
Well, it seems to be a subject that we don't talk about very much with quilting. Like, I know a lot of people are attracted to quilting because they're already in pain. And it's sedentary. But being sedentary will actually make those issues worse instead of better. You know, how did you approach your book for all of us that have these little aches and pains? Is it preventative? Is it trying to reclaim some of that health?
I keep it strictly to ergonomics and stretches. I don't go into any resistance training or anything like that in it. A lot of it, the first half is all ergonomic. You know, what's your best height for this? What's your best height for that? And tent your fingers when you're cutting and all those sorts of things that a lot of people know and some people don't. And then the second half are stretches, and they're all illustrated by somebody else. I refer to them as stretches for quilters because none of them you have to get on the floor for, right? Who wants to get on the floor in their sewing room? Not many people. So you can do them all seated or standing. I'm a big fan of what I call spontaneous stretching. And that just means like, don't replace what you're already doing. That's great. Do everything you're already doing. But if you're waiting for that, you know, that bobbin to low, roll your shoulders, just little things that just build into everything you do. And so that's kind of what I would love to see everybody doing, is just every time they're, you know, they're sitting and they're thinking and whatever, you know, and then that's done.
I always say that sewing is good, so good for us mentally and emotionally, but it does take that toll on us physically. Those would be great ideas to use so it doesn't pull us out of that right side of our brain. They're just very passive and ones we can incorporate as I sit up straight here and make sure.
Well, no, and because we want to make it part of it, right? So we don't have to stop and think, right? And I mean, everybody sort of has their less Mercedes-Benz parts. I have a numerous spots with arthritis, but one of my not Mercedes-Benz parts is one of my ankles. You know what I mean by that? Like, they're just our bad body parts. I tend to focus more on calf stretches or things like that than somebody else might be focusing on something different. You kind of get in the habit of, and not that this is a good thing to be doing the same stretches over and over, but you do kind of gravitate towards the ones you need. Let's put it that way. There's certain ones that every crafter maker of any kind needs. And that big one, of course, is the chest, because everything we do is like this. Everything, whether it's reading, whether it's driving, knitting, crocheting, definitely quilting, everything is like this. And so anytime we get the opportunity to stretch that out, and depending on your chair, you can go behind your chair, whatever, and depending on how tight you are, is how much it's going to hurt. And one of my favorite ones is the doorway stretch, where you're walking through the doorway and you stop and you put your arms on the side and then you take a little step. And I'm always really clear to people is that if you Google this exercise every single time, it's going to tell you to step through that doorway. Do not step through that doorway, because you have no idea how tight you are. So you go up to the door and you get in position. And then the first thing you're going to do is you're just going to take a really deep breath and bring your chest into the doorway. And you're going to go, oh, I'm tight. And then maybe you're going to take a half a step in and you're going to go, oh man, I'm really tight. And, you know, a month later, maybe you'll be stepping through, maybe you'll never be stepping through, but you just have to it's just one of those things. It's like, until you do it, you have no concept of how tight you are.
So do your exercises show stages of doing it? Like that one where you say you just breathe. Are all the exercises like that? So there's that entry level?
Well, I will say they're all entry level. There's lots of quilters out there that have personal trainers or go to the gym or they go to yoga and they do all these things. But there's lots, like I think of my mom all the time, who never did a stretch in her life, and so they're all at beginner level. There's a few of them where I have modifications to make them more difficult, but really not many. They'd more be a modification that if that doesn't work for you, try this. Most of them only have one picture per exercise, and then the wording will describe how to follow through with it. They're straightforward, simple stretches. I really wanted it to be with the spiral binding so that it could lay flat and you could flip through.
You talk about lighting. People
Mhm.
forget how important illumination is in our physical
Yeah.
posture.
Well, because what happens when it's dim lighting? What do? You do this. You got to get in close, right? That's the natural. Of course, we're going to do that, right? We got to get in to see. And so I always suggest, I'm not a big handiwork person. This was my summer to do it, and it didn't happen. And I always remind people that bring your work to you rather than bringing you to your work. So whether that's with, normally I always have a pair of readers on my head or tucked someplace or whatever. And to try to, if you're putting a pillow on there or then your work on there or whatever it is, to bring everything up to you so that there's less of you coming down to it. I actually have a number of different pairs of readers with different strengths depending on which job I have. In your research for your book, did you discover anything that you hadn't considered before? I have since the book, and since I've been speaking with people on Zoom, and they'll say, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And I'm like, no, but I will. Definitely with the long arm section, which congratulations, you just got a long arm not too long ago, I guess. Long arming is really, really difficult. Long arming is really tricky as far as getting it set up the right way for you, because it really depends on what kind of work you're doing, whether you're bent over at the back doing a pantograph, you're doing free motion work, you're doing fine work, you're doing computerized work. And so for that, I had to really ask around to other people, because I have a pro stitcher. I don't do rulers. I don't do free motion. I always say I was a terrible machine quilter, so I went into the business of machine quilting. Well, I discovered while I was even setting it up that before I have my own long arm, I'd never had the machine at the right height. My biggest problem is clenching. Yeah. When I'm intent on anything, my whole body just goes like this. That's one of the tips for as well too, is not to squeeze too tightly and to keep your elbows in rather than out. I have tips from different other quilters. And so Stuart Hillard in the UK. So one thing that he really says is to keep your arms in close to your body. He calls them chicken wings. Don't have chicken wings, keep them in close. There was lots of other things like that. But I mean, my own long arm right now is not set up at the right height for me, because I had wheels on it. When I was still training people, I wanted to push it back and bring it out. As they moved around, it was losing the balance, because this one would spin and come down and that one wouldn't. And so I was having trouble keeping the machine balanced. And it, at that time, was too high. So took the wheels off, brought it down. And of course, all the helpers leave and everything. And then you're working on it 2 days later going, oh, I don't think this is right. So mine actually right now is too low. And so I have to get some muscle back in here. One thing I say in the long arming section is don't ever think that your first setup is going to be your best setup, because it's such a big deal to adjust it. It really is. You're kind of like, it's okay. Long arming is tough on the body. Well, I'm thinking of quilting on your domestic sewing machine. Is there anything more taxing on the body than manhandling a big quilt through a domestic sewing machine? It really is. So I have tips on that from Krista Watson, Melissa Marginet, and basically it comes down to corralling that fabric. I know Krista likes to have a big table beside her and take the weight off and have it spread all around the table. I've done that with an ironing board and a tablecloth from the dollar store, and put it up if I'm doing a big quilt with a binding or something, just so there's room and it can move around. And then there's the things, of course, that hold it up in the air for you. So yeah, it's a way of trying to wrangle the fabric, really. Those gloves are really helpful. I find that not just quilting, I find anytime I'm using a big piece of fabric or anything, I will put that glove on my left hand just to help manage it, so the shoulder doesn't start creeping up and clenching. Yeah, with the grip. If I have one tip, that's my tip. If a person only had the opportunity to do one stretch, what is your one stretch that you recommend people do? For quilters, sewers, makers, or anyone that's on their computer or their tablet or their phone, definitely the chest, something that stretches your chest. And the easiest one to do that is just to open your arms nice and wide. That's the easiest one. There's lots of ways to make that more difficult or less wide. Putting your hands behind your back, putting your hands behind your head, and just thinking about what you're doing. But definitely anything for the chest would be my go-to.
So what stretch do you think is the most underrated stretch that people can do?
That really depends on the person, to be honest, because for someone like myself that's had a lot of issues with arthritis in the ankles and sprains and things like that, I tend to do a lot of stretching of my calves and Achilles and things. A lot of people we know suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome, and so those stretches might be the best for them. I don't think they're the most underrated because we've heard a lot about those over the years, and so people kind of have those down. And so I don't think there's any one stretch that I would consider the more underrated than any others.
When you get into the zone and you start sewing, how often do you forget to do your stretches, or are they're just habits now?
I would say, honestly, they really are just habits because I'm a very achy person. I really am. I have my genetics, my kids complain now about thanks for the genetics, mom, because this is, happening or this is happening. And so it really is, it's been my goal for many, many, many a year is just to try to stay as pain-free and limber as I can. The one thing that I think really helps with their sewing work triangle. I always want it to be as inefficient as possible. So get that ironing board as far away from your sewing machine as you can. The cutting table doesn't matter quite so much because you're not cutting constantly while you're sewing like you are ironing. But that for me is the big one. And because, every time you stand up, you pump blood, you increase circulation, you increase blood flow. And so it really helps.
So now that you're done doing the book, are you back to quilting?
I never stopped, especially with the last 2 years. One thing that I did when the book was released, I had this quilt that I did a sew along with. Quilt was called So Grateful for 2021. So I have 18 tipsters in the book. 15 of them are from the quilting world and 3 of them are from the health and wellness world. In my mind, I thought, well, I would like to make a quilt for myself that one block represents each person that way. And some were obvious. It's like, oh, Jenny Doan, obviously I'm doing a Missouri Star, and Brigitte Heitland, okay, I'm going to do Flying Geese. One that I did was Courthouse Steps because it looked like a dumbbell. And so that represented strength and that represented my health and wellness people. And so the blocks represented things that we missed in 2020 and things that we were looking forward to in 2021. Now, I was doing this in December of 2020. So little did I know that in 2021, we still wouldn't be able to do all the things like the Flying Geese. That was for 2021. So that kept me very, very busy. And it was great because it was a real focus during the time and kept me sewing. It started in April and finished in July, I guess. Everybody seemed to love it. 2 of the quilters down Eastway wrote this poem. They wrote a poem for it that is so amazing that describes each one of the blocks and everything.
So is blue your color?
Yeah, I'm very much a blue and white girl. I try to do other things. That was one of the nice thing about the sew along is one of the palettes that I had used was Brigitte Heitland's quotation. And it's the grays and the mustards and the orange, which I would never have bought before. And it's probably one of my favorites. Hers and Sarah Ashford. Well, they're all my favorites, but so I am trying to do other. And especially if it comes to any stash busting or like that, it's always going to end up being blue and white because that's what I have. The quilt behind me is not my usual quilt. I'm a utilitarian quilter. I would rather make a queen size quilt than a wall hanging in a minute because it has a purpose. I really like things to have a purpose. So, lots of baby quilts, lots of what have you. I like to make one block and then make 20 of them and finish a quilt. I quilt I'm like, just get it done, right? I just like to zoom through and be done. And so this one is taking me longer because I have to stop and think all the time. I actually have to stop and think about the measurement or where goes where and all that kind of stuff. So it is taking me, I just come back and forth. I've made 2 other quilts while this has been on here, and I just put another piece of batting over top and made those ones. Recently, I started doing a few quilts for the residential school survivors group. They're on Facebook, and the woman who has spearheaded it, her name is Vanessa, and she's in Timmins. I've already sent, I don't know, 3 or 4 out to individuals. So I was thinking, oh, wouldn't this be a great one? And so I had already purchased the Lakeside quilt from Anne-Marie Cheney. And I thought, oh, this would be, and it's a full size bed quilt. So I emailed her and asked her, because hers is slightly different from this. It's like 7 paddles, and her background are like 3 pieces, not 24 pieces, because what was I thinking? I was thinking I had all these batiks and it would look like water and whatever, and said, are you okay with me doing this? And she said, of course.
It is a stunning quilt. I love that one. I think it's very evocative of all those beautiful canoes, the time on the lake. So you're a pretty high energy person. What is your favorite part of quilting?
Definitely right at the beginning. Like, I think if I could just select fabrics and make kits for people, I would be in my element, because that really is the most fun, and pulling everything down and laying it out and seeing what's happening. Because then the sewing, really, I'm like I said, I tend to do fairly simple quilts and then just pick a block and repeat it. And so then the quilting I do on the long arm, and I don't hand stitch my binding. I really plan, when I'm planning a quilt, that the final border will be quite similar to the binding sometimes, or the back, so that I can machine stitch it or whatever. I really wanted to hand stitch this summer, and my hand stitching consisted of, which you have already done by now, or you'll be doing, but when you quilt a quilt on the long arm and you go over the edges and then you trim it down, you have all these sandwiches that are quilted. And so that's my relaxing, sitting with my seam picker on the dock, because then the fluff can fly, picking out all of those. Like, I don't waste anything, picking out all those stitches, and then I reuse that fabric. That's my slow stitching, is sitting and picking out threads.
So do you put a label on your quilts?
I should. I don't. I really don't.
Actually, out of all the people that I've interviewed this year, I think only maybe 1 or 2 do.
Because we're done. We're done.
Yes, we're done. We're done. Yeah, I can barely get the stitches, like the threads, buried.
Because we're thinking about the next one. I used to work with Quilts of Valor in this area, and of course they all have labels on their back and everything like that. And so sewed a lot of those on.
So do you have a workshop or lecture that you run?
Well, I was doing in-person lectures, but so for the last year, I've been speaking to a lot of guilds. And so I have 2 lectures. And the first one is, hands down the most popular. It's called So Smart, the Ergonomics of Healthy Quilting. And that is, 99.9% of the time, the one people want. And then once they have that, if they want me to come back, then I have a second lecture, and it focuses more on, eating anti-inflammatory foods, really focuses a lot more on the stretching and just different things that you can do that is not so much the ergonomics, but the ergonomics is definitely, the more important one, because the other things you can get from other places, right? The diet and the stretching and, that.
So now that you've done the big one, do you have another book in the works?
I have spoken with the acquisitions editor at C&T about another one. There's nothing concrete just yet. But again, we'd like something that is more on the health and wellness side than the ergonomic side, because one thing people have asked for with the book is they want more stretches and more stretches like that. I guess it would fall under my second lecture, all the things that are in my second lecture. Over the years, and we all have different interests that go up and down, but there was definitely a certain part of my life where I had my Reiki certification, my EFT certification, led meditation, and all of those things, which I really have not been tuned into the last number of years. And so things like that, and just really simple things, again, that a lot of people are already aware of, but some people aren't. And so just sort of like a well-rounded self-care type of book, but it would still, the illustrations would still all be makers in their element, doing whatever they're doing that way. And it would be geared at people who are more sedentary, because most makers are. But yeah, something that sort of looks at the whole person.
So if people want to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
Healthy Quilting on Instagram, Healthy Quilting with Rose on Facebook. Rose at healthyquilting.com. Healthyquilting.com is probably the easiest spot to get to.
Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing all your depth of knowledge. It's been wonderful. Good reminder to keep my shoulders down and stretch. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Karen.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Rose Parr. I have been trying to incorporate some spontaneous stretching in my day whenever I can, plus a few more of the stretches in her book, and I can already feel the difference. If you are interested in purchasing her book, I'll leave a link in the notes below. I'll also have her contact information, her social media links, and her website info as well. Next up on Karen's Quilt Circle is Ellen Simon, who has been making memory quilts for others for over 25 years. That is a lot of t-shirts. I asked her 1,000 questions about the process, and you don't want to miss it, so be sure to subscribe. The next time you're in your sewing space, make sure Karen's Quilt Circle is playing on in the background. I have interviewed so many interesting people. Let one inspire you. Check out my latest video on English paper piecing and the tools and techniques you'll need to get started. Take care, and I'll see you next time.